I remember and I learned from Daniel that God is the source of all wisdom and power. Historical chapters where we read about what's happened in the life of Daniel and his friends as they were in.
And because of Daniel's obedient and submissive heart, God took him and made him better.
The dream that the king had, and no one was able to tell what the dream meant and the meaning of the dream except Daniel. This is, if we are faithful to him, he will be faithful to us as well.
Bible study on the book of Hosanna.
الشخص الروحي يشعر أن حياته ملك للناس. وربنا أعطاه هذه الحياة لخدمة الناس ولإسعاد الناس.
Atheism. We are using scientific facts. We have many proofs. Atheist scientists converted and became believers. Watch us on CYC, Coptic Youth Channel.
Even my close friends have left.
But she's so innocent. Why she never replied back to me, huh? She posted great things about her.
Mark, I need to pick your brain.
How can I transition from childhood to adolescence and from adolescence to adulthood?
I would like to talk to you all about adolescence, a time of transition.
How can I pay off my mounting college loans?
If you're not working yet, if you don't have a lot of financial means yet, maybe you're still with mom and dad, don't have more than 2 credit cards.
How can we stop domestic violence?
I think domestic violence has many reasons to start with.
How do I connect my Coptic and American cultures and enjoy both?
Sometimes clashes with culture, and sometimes the kids feel pressure to go out on dates with the opposite sex.
Welcome to Route 139.
Hello,
and welcome to a new episode of Stop and Hop.
Before you try to change yourself, you obviously need help from God.
If I know more, judged more.
So it's almost like trying to portray yourself as someone that you're not.
If you want to change yourself, that's also something that you want. Bye!
It takes you to dark places.
He told me that Baba is watching something bad and I know it's bad.
It fuels modern day slavery.
And I was looking for more channels.
You tried before to ask her to act out like the movies?
I always thought that I can stop anytime I want to, and I cannot stop anything.
Your secret action was not secret anymore. You need help.
Bold all things to all men.
Every evangelist is unique. Every recipient of evangelism is unique.
Building community with relationship builders.
How am I going to hear the Holy Spirit? Is it easy to hear the promptings of the Holy Spirit?
One-time messages.
Pray harder. Listen harder.
Series of sermons by Father Anthony Masiha.
I'm just making it easy and say just hear the Holy Spirit and that's it.
From St. Timothy and St. Athanasius Church in Arlington.
Man, it's hard stuff, but we need to strive harder. Jesus loves to leave behind the 99 and go after it.
Are you interested in your...
I have many who would say that their body is their business.
Do you wonder of specific matters in your life?
The reason why they created that choir was to stop women from talking and from gossiping.
Are you afraid of making some quick decisions?
Abortion, because we don't know if the fetus is a person.
Do you want to know many answers?
Men and women are different, and I think unfortunately society in the moment really doesn't want to accept that.
Just watch Youth Chat CYC.
Daniel is a faithful man, that he kept his focus on God.
I remember and I learned from Daniel that God is the source of all wisdom and power. Historical chapters where we read about what's happened in the life of Daniel and as they were in exile.
And God took him and made him better.
The dream that the king had, and no one was able to tell what the dream meant and the meaning of the dream except Daniel. This is his promise. If we are faithful to him, he will be faithful to us.
Bible study on the book of Daniel in Hosanna.
يشعر أن حياته ملك للناس. وربنا أعطاه هذه الحياة لخدمة ولإسعاد الناس.
Atheism. We are using scientific facts. We have many proofs. Atheist scientists converted and became believers. Watch us on CYC Coptic Youth channel.
It hurts even more when you know you're innocent. Even my close friends have left me.
But you're so innocent. Why'd you never reply back to me, huh?
She posted great things about her.
Mark, I need to pick your brain.
How can I transition from childhood to adolescence and from adolescence to adulthood?
I would like to talk to you all about adolescence, the time of transition.
How can I pay off my mounting college loans?
If you're not working yet, if you don't have a lot of financial means yet, maybe you're still with mom and dad, don't have more than 2 credit cards.
How can we stop domestic violence?
Violence has many reasons to start with.
How do I connect my Coptic and American cultures and enjoy both?
Sometimes clashes with the Western culture, and sometimes the kids feel pressure to go out on dates with the opposite sex.
Welcome to Route 139.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Stop and Hop.
Before you try to change yourself, you obviously need help from God.
If I know more, I'm going to be judged more.
So it's almost like trying to portray yourself as someone that you're not.
If you want to change yourself, that's also something that you want. Bye!
It takes you to dark places.
He told me that Baba is watching something bad, and I know it's bad.
It fuels modern day slavery.
And I was doing
You tried before to ask her to act out like the movies?
I always thought that I can stop anytime I want to, and I can stop anything.
Your secret action was not secret anymore. You need help.
Bold, to all men.
Every evangelist is unique. Every recipient of evangelism is unique.
Building community with relationship builders.
How am I going to hear the Holy Spirit? Is it easy to hear the promptings of the Holy Spirit?
One-time messages.
Pray harder. Listen harder.
Series of sermons by Father Anthony Masiha.
And I'm just making it easy and say, just hear the Holy Spirit, and that's it.
From St. Timothy and St. Athanasius Church in Arlington.
Man, it's hard stuff, but we need to strive harder. Jesus loves to leave behind the 99 and go after it.
Are you interested in youth problems?
I have many friends who would say that their body's their business.
Do you wonder of specific matters in your life?
The reason why they created that to stop women from actually talking and from gossiping. And
Are you afraid of making some quick decisions?
Abortion shouldn't happen because we don't know if the fetus is a person.
Do you want to know many answers of various questions?
Men and women are different, and I think unfortunately society in the moment really doesn't want to accept that.
Just watch Youth Chat on CYC.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ask on CYC. So today's episode is about addiction. So let me give you a quick definition of what the dictionary says addiction is about. So addiction is the condition that results when a person ingests a substance, for example, alcohol, cocaine, or even nicotine, or engages in an activity such as gambling, sex, or even shopping that interferes and creates a pleasurable and continued feeling within the person. So it becomes compulsive and it interferes with their ordinary life and responsibilities such as work, church, and family and friends. But today we're not going to talk about your cliched typical addictions. We're going to talk about addictions that you probably don't even know about. Addictions that happen in your life that you're not even aware about. So tune in and ask questions on the number 0416 551 292. And if you're daring enough, call in and ask your question to the same number. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Today's guest we have with us Dr. David Youssef. Welcome, Doctor.
Hey, Mina, how you going? Just call me David, please.
Sure, David. It's a pleasure having you on the show for today.
Thanks for having me.
So I know I said doctor, but explain to the audience what you do for a living.
So I'm a paediatric trainee in Western Sydney, and I've been doing that for 2 years, and before that I was doing adult training.
Okay. All right. So in your opinion, medically speaking, what is addiction?
I guess the definition that you gave breaks it up into two components. So there's obviously the physical, normal stuff that you talk about, the drugs, the alcohol, the things that you can get access to. Then there's also the behavioural aspects. So talking about the things that leads you to pleasure and reward. So things that are hard to maybe to keep away from. So things like your emotions, your ability to look out for specials on the internet, even simple pleasures like that, being in the public eye, that can also be an addiction and can also be an impulse that drives you constantly.
Okay. So what's the difference between a habit and an addiction?
I guess the difference is what you do with one compared to, you might have the habit of getting up, brushing your teeth before you have your morning coffee. The difference, I guess, between the habit and addiction then becomes what you have to do to kind of fulfill that. So, for example, do you have to do it in that particular order, or can you do it in any other order? You know, is there an impulse to actually have to do it? Like, I have to have my coffee and I have to have it this way and this hot before I function normally. Or, you know, is there a larger amount that you need to function normally? For example, like with coffee. So, for example, if you have 2 a day and all of a sudden you need 10 a day to function, then that's the difference between an addiction, because there's between them. One becomes kind of gelled into the other.
So could you say that one takes control of you, where the other one, you control it?
Well, one definitely plays on your emotions, and because you can't recognize that it's become a part of you. Whereas the other, know that you might do it and you may not do it. So you still have that ability to kind of suppress one, whereas with the addiction, you may or may not be able to suppress it. You may have gone too far down the track.
Sure. So let me ask you a question. I know lately it's been birth season where everyone's giving birth and people are pregnant. So I want to ask you a question about being pregnant and addicted.
Okay.
The reason why I'm asking you is I've read of a story where there was a pregnant mother who was addicted to heroin. And when the child was born, they had to wean the child off the heroin slowly by giving him heroin.
Okay. So normally what normally occurs is that they don't give the child heroin. What they'll do is give them something equivalent to wean the opioids out of their system. So the body produces a natural amount of pain relief hormones. When a mother is on like addictive drugs like heroin, methadone, amphetamines, those sort of things, and the minute you cut the umbilical cord from the child, it's basically cutting the supply. So the child goes into a withdrawal state. So the first things we start seeing is the kids will start jittering and they'll start shaking in your hands and you can't stop them. They'll start crying non-stop. They'll start pausing when they're supposed to breathe. They won't feed and they just don't behave like the rest of the other kids. So the first thing we do is try to work out what the mum's taken, and sometimes it makes it really hard because sometimes they haven't taken just one substance. It's like alcohol plus heroin plus, you know, pot or something else. They mix the three together and then we're left to carry the trail. So what we do is we give them basically morphine and larger doses of what their body would normally produce to suppress their normal response, with the idea that we basically anesthetize a child at some extent so that they don't have seizures on us. If that fails, sometimes we have to use basically seizure medication that used to be used long ago to kind of suppress the child from responding the same way. So basically what they're doing is having a seizure indirectly from the fact that this supply is now being cut off from the mum.
Sure, and this relates to drug abuse, but how about with other stuff like coffee, like you were talking about earlier? Can coffee affect the child if the mother is overdosing in coffee?
Yeah, so I mean, not just, I mean, there's a lot of things in pregnancy that affects, basically you're looking at two people in one. So anything that the mum has, say for example, things like cheeses and even something as simple as cheese, the caffeine amount, so we get the kids having the same symptoms from caffeine as they do from the heroin and methadone. When we were working in Tweed Heads, we used to get that a lot, like the mums would be on recreational drugs and the kids would come out basically and they'd spend 6, 7, sometimes 10 days in these special care nurseries just to basically detox from these medications because they couldn't get off the programs or they couldn't get off the drugs before the delivery. And at any point during the development of the child, you got to think that not all the organs are developed. So if they're having alcohol, it affects their brain, it affects their face, it affects their limbs. Sometimes the kids come out dysmorphic and so the mother's like, well, you know, what do I do now? So it's hard to say at one point, if you stopped, you know, the drugs, would it make a difference? Because at any point during that, the organs are still developing, even up until the time of birth.
Sure. Okay, so let's stay away from the typical substance that causes addiction like drugs, alcohol and cigarettes. Can you give me examples of non-cliche addictive substances or addictive behaviours?
Well, the one that I was just reading about earlier this morning was in terms of internet and also game playing. So there's a group out of Melbourne that have done studies and they've looked at kids and the amount of game playing they do in terms of virtual kind of reality, like things like SimCity where they can play, basically live out their fantasies or sexual fantasies online without actually having to either meet the partner or meet the other person, or things like fantasy worlds, so Warcraft, Minecraft, those sort of things, where 15, 16-year-olds are playing with 40-year-olds. And so what they'll do is they'll change their biological clock, so they'll stay up till 4, 5, 6 in the morning and sleep during the day, during the school holidays, or even during school and skip school, because they cannot detach from that. So they live in a world where no one can harm them, and they have this so-called, social friendship, but they can't have that in the real world. And they don't realize they're addicted. And, it's only their families that realize that they don't go out anymore, they don't attend sports, they don't go to church for some of them. Some of them just stop doing their homework, and the teachers complain that they're isolated. So these kids become basically, their friends become the characters they play. So it'll be like, for example, when we were growing up, if you became Sonic the Hedgehog, that's their equivalent. So they would become basically someone that's invincible, that couldn't be harmed, that couldn't be teased, to live out that fantasy.
So you're saying antisocial behaviour is one symptom of being addicted to such games?
Yeah. So a lot of them, there's a couple of kids that have actually gone and acted on the games they played. So a lot of the ones where the war games, there are kids that are actually being killed because of the fact that their friends have either played for prolonged periods, or they actually took it literally, and they actually acted upon what happened in the game. So in China and in America, there are people that have acted on these games. And so we don't get a lot of the games that they get overseas here. They're actually screened for and banned. And so people are getting a pile of games so they can live out these, fantasies.
There's also another game that came to mind, and I know the viewers are probably going to hate me for mentioning it, but Candy Crush.
Oh, yeah.
You aware of this game?
Yeah, well, I was just speaking to a colleague actually before I came, and she was saying that, she's only up to level 92, and I've not played it, to be honest with you. But she said to me, you can go into triple-digit sort of levels of this game. But I was saying to her that this game actually makes in excess of $800,000 a day. And there are 93 billion people playing this game every single day. So the share market for this game is phenomenal. And people apparently are trying to tactically, get lives, gain lives, and they spend all this game that, they succeed. It's kind of a reward system. If I finish this level, I'm only this much away from the next level or whatever. And so your body kind of responds to that reward system. Okay, I need to obtain a reward. If I get it, then I'll get to the next level, and then I wonder what's waiting me at the next level. So it kind of teaches them, I guess, that the more you fight or the more you struggle, the more you earn in the next level. So it kind of gives them a bit of a warped sense of, our world and society and those things.
Yeah, look, I know there are people who pay money to get these extra lives, but there are also the other people who would annoy their friends on Facebook to give them those extra lives. And,
you're kidding.
And I've been seeing all these statuses up there saying, please stop sending me Candy Crush requests. Has these people become addicted to the point where they start annoying their friends?
Well, the point of addiction, I guess the issue is that if you don't realize them, then you don't know you're addicted. So, for example, if you go to Candy Crush, if you played the first 10 levels and you played it on your lunch break, then that's fine. But if all of a sudden you're playing at the set of stoplights, at the supermarket and those sort of things, before you know it, you've got so enthralled in it that you forget you've got family, friends, loved ones, and you're playing it just out of the fact that you need to get to the next level. So the problem with the addiction is there is a problem, and it just takes over and consumes you just slowly. So you see a change in the personality of the individual, and the closest person to that individual that's affected will see the changes first. Yeah. So usually it's like, the wife or the husband or whatever it may be, and they'll be like, why do you spend so much time on the computer?
Yeah.
So it's funny how something so simple can change your perception, because people use social media to basically feed or thrive the addiction even further.
Sure. I had a stage, this game, but when I saw the people around me and how it affected them, I deleted it straight away.
Yeah. I've had a couple of requests for this game, and then I didn't realize what it was until you brought it up today. So I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah. So I didn't want to be succumbed to it to the way that they did.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to the viewers, so please send your questions to 0416 551 292 Also, if you're daring enough to ask in a question by calling, please also call to the same number 0416 551 292. So, David, we just got a question from an audience member.
Sure.
They're asking,
yeah,
how exactly does God give us the edge in overcoming addiction in comparison to non-believers?
Okay, I guess the difference between, in terms of from a spiritual perspective, addiction, I guess recognizing that you have a problem is the biggest thing, and also tuning in to the support or social support around you in needing that help. So from a godly perspective, I mean, I guess the classic example is King David. King David, when he fell, the night that he slept with, his armyman's wife, he did it on a night that he didn't basically follow his normal orders. So he sent them all to pray. King David hung out on the roof, and then basically he committed adultery. So on the night that he basically broke his usual behavior or usual techniques, he was able to basically change one aspect of the element or the environment to provide for that addiction. So one of the earliest things I think you need to do is recognize that there is a problem. And some come from someone really, really close, like mom, dad, brother, sister, work members. And then if you recognize that there is a problem, then seeking help. And the person, I guess, that, or persons that you should seek are people that are going to be honestly and truthfully brutal, as in they'll say, Mina, you have an addiction and I'm really worried about you and I think you need help.
Sure.
And so from that perspective, from a godly perspective, there's no barrier or there's no stop as in, this is enough, I've given Mina enough chances, I quit. God doesn't do that with us as do other people. So from a godly perspective, he's always like the father that's waiting for the prodigal son. Arms open, I'm ready when you are, just give me the signal. And the problem is we don't even become the prodigal son. We just want to sit in the mud and go, well, I'm just waiting now. I'm just waiting for God to come. But I mean, he's waiting, but the person that's not tuning in is yourself, So it always makes it hard if you don't realize there's a problem, but at the same time, you don't want to seek help. So.
Yeah. Look, I know you mentioned this before, but coffee, can it really be addictive?
It can be, and they've done, there's multiple studies that the researchers have done in terms of caffeine and caffeinated products, even to the point of, specific energy drinks, that a lot of the people that work with in the hospitals, they'll drink it just to stay awake and to keep going. And they get to a point where they are actually tolerant to the effects of it, and they get withdrawal effects if they don't have it. So they get to a point where they need to have it just to be normally function. So it doesn't even work anymore. I had one guy that was on the back of the cans, it says, maximum 3 a day. He was on 5 a day.
Wow.
And was sitting there jittering his hands. And I said to him, what happened? And he said to me, I haven't had the 3 or 5 that I was supposed to have today. That's why I'm shaking. So you can get withdrawal effects from anything, from methadone, heroin, morphine, coffee. Coffee is the biggest one, and it's the most accessible because now it's kind of the social norm. You go out, you don't say I'm going to go out for tea. You say I'm going to go out for coffee.
Yeah.
So if teenagers and everyone else is doing it, and most business meetings, most functions will take place over some sort of caffeinated product. So if you don't drink it, it's kind of frowned upon. So you're almost enticed to take it up, even if you're not drinking it normally.
You know what's worrying? They have the baby chino now.
Yeah.
So even though there's no
yeah, exactly
but
right.
it's getting the child in the habit.
Yeah, and it looks exactly the same. And if you notice, they've actually downsized the coffee for the adults. So what they've done is the piccolos now, which is basically the baby chino equivalent, but the adult version. So it's got exactly the same, but with the same amount of coffee in a smaller cup. So people are drinking 3 or 4 of these because there's less milk and less other substances in there.
Yeah.
So they think that it's going to cause them to have less weight gain. But at the same time, they're getting the caffeine. So it's a big problem either way.
And
either way.
It's dangerous because a lot of health practitioners out there are advising coffee for weight loss.
Yeah.
So imagine you jump on it 6 times a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're trying to lose weight.
And the problem is that you don't function at better levels. Like we know that with caffeine, you get to a state where basically you've reached your maximum performance. After that state, it doesn't work. It actually has no effect. You get a ceiling effect. And so you get to that level and you actually may or may not need that same level just to function normally. So if you're on two coffees a day, and all of a sudden you take up a job in a place where they drink 5 a day, if you copy or emulate them, then at the same time, you get to 5 a day and then you'll need that just to function.
Wow.
So you'll start getting headaches and and palpitations and chest pain because you're not having that. So your body's trying to say to you, hey, I can't cope with this. You need to give me more just to function normally. And so they become fatigued despite the amount of coffee they have.
Yeah. Oh, wow. We got another question from the audience. They're asking, statistically, what is the most difficult addiction to overcome?
I guess, it depends on look at and, what population group. But in terms of, I guess if you look at adolescents, the most common ones are alcohol, drugs, and drugs of anything. So drugs of addiction, and then they separate it into drugs that, you can get over the counter, prescription drugs. But then at the same time, you've got to look at, no one's going to do a trial and say, right, sweet, let's give 1,000 people heroin, 1,000 people amphetamine, and 1,000 people caffeine and see who's going to get addicted first. But what we do know is that irregardless of what substance you use, if you give it to someone frequently enough, long enough, and in the right environment, they will get addicted. Train them almost like, psychologists have trained dogs and previously to act. No matter what it is that you give them, that substance will become an addictive substance in the right sort of environment. So besides the alcohol and the drugs, there is other ones that we're now starting to realize, like the society, the American society has realized that things like sex has become basically an addiction now for some people, and they recognize it as a disorder, not just as part of like mental health problems, but as its own sort of problem. The people are addicted to sex, as in seeing sex as an entity, and pornography and the issues associated with that now are starting to come in.
So let's look a bit more into sex. So you're saying it can be addictive, which can be dangerous for two things. First of all, whether a person engages in sex before a marriage, which makes it harder for them to repent because they've become addicted to it. Am I right?
Yeah.
And then you also look at it in the perspective of in a married environment where the person becomes addicted to sex, that they request it all the time, that they forget the whole purpose of marriage and the whole purpose of love within the entity of marriage. So this can be a danger for both scenarios, yeah?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, if you take sex and then separate it from marriage, then you just treat it like coffee in a cup. And you could have it any other day. The difference then is, what's the point of having it after marriage? You've already explored something that doesn't belong to you, and you've tried something that you'll never actually own until that day comes.
Sure.
So you get to marriage and you're like, well, what's the point? I've already lived with this person, I already know this person, and I've already had sex with this person. So basically, I've had the reward without having to go through the pain. So part of waiting and during that engagement period, the idea is to kind of work out your compatibility, and the idea that once you're married, that in bliss, I guess, and under the eyes of God, you've become united with this person. So the three become one. And so it's hard to then say to someone, I love you, if you've already kind of used their body for what you think or gratification that you need. And then afterwards, I know couples that unfortunately they had sex before marriage, and they got to the wedding day, and then on the wedding day, the wedding evening, that night, they got to the hotel, they were like, what do we do now? Because for them, it wasn't new. It was already trialed, it was tested. This was just another night. So for them, they had lived a married life outside of marriage. They thought they had already tested it. So if you separate the two, you separate sex from marriage, then it just becomes another object. It just becomes another entity that anyone can have.
And because of its addictive effects, it's harder for the person to repent and become pure.
Because you trivialize it. You just make it like everything else. Like, for example, the first coffee of the day, if you went to a barista who did it really nice, you probably will think about that first coffee of the day for the rest of the day.
Sure.
But if I just made you a coffee, just a normal coffee at home, it probably might not give you the same pleasurable effects. So you may sit there and think that the first sexual encounter you have outside of marriage is amazing and you love this person, draws you closer.
Yeah.
But then the whole purpose of marriage is to draw you closer and to share your love, mind, body and soul with that person, that you basically sacrifice everything. And so if you're not going to do that after marriage, then what's the point,
Yeah. Okay. Well, I got another question that just come in from the audience. They're saying, how can I help a friend overcome, or how can I help them work through their addiction?
Okay, so I guess identifying, as I said before, so identifying what the addiction is. Okay, so some addictions are easier to give up. For example, tobacco or shisha or Candy Crush is obviously a little bit easier to deal with than heroin and methadone and that sort of program, because the two need two different entities. So firstly, making sure you've identified that this person needs help and they're happy to be helped. The second thing is, I guess, getting on board with their family, their friends. And then from the third perspective is involving a spiritual father, because this is not an easy road. There will be relapses, there will be failures, there will be times where things go wrong, the person gets angry, they become volatile, they could even want to kill you or beat you up. So you definitely need a network. It can't be, all of a sudden I find a person with an addiction, I'm going to go save their life. It doesn't work, because you'll be disheartened by the first time you fail. So the idea is that even with a lot of these AA programs, like the Alcoholics Anonymous and the cigarette, that there is going to be constant relapse, there's going to be failures, but what do you do at each of these stages? So engaging the person in the right program, but as long as they're willing to change, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned shisha. A lot of people, it's been a hot topic in society today because it's become very common. And a lot of people's response is saying, but I'm not addicted. It's a social thing. Can it be addictive?
Shisha this is the tricky part, because I have a lot of colleagues that think that shisha is not as harmful as tobacco. But shisha is actually 10 times worse, in the respect that because it's visualized as being in water and it's bubbling and there's nothing else, there's a lot of problems with shisha. In the Middle East, they have problems with, for example, tuberculosis, like chest infections from the actual pipes and the water they use. Here, we don't have that, fortunately, but what we do have is the problems with the charcoal. So the charcoal has a lot of carbon dioxide in it and a lot of other chemicals. And that's supposedly the equivalent of, if you have one shisha inhalation over 1 hour period, okay, so if you draw for an hour, 100 to 200 cigarettes, roughly. So if you compare one cigarette, which has roughly about 50,000, say, chemicals, we only know of about 1,500 chemicals. So 1,500 chemicals for 1 hour is the equivalent of 200 cigarettes with 50,000 chemicals.
But then someone would argue and go, but it's filtered by water.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's the problem, because you visualize something in a hose and you're sucking it and everyone's doing it and there's 10 around a group. When I was up in the Gold Coast, you'd see 10, 15 people and 3, 4 shishas, and that was the social outing. And the problem is they still get exactly the same rates of oral cancer and throat cancer and chest infections. They get it all exactly the same as cigarettes. And you can't convince these people, because what they see is not a cigarette. They don't see the people having the lung transplants.
But can they be addicted but not aware of it, since they just do it socially?
Yeah, and that's part of it's funny. It's like when you hear someone say, "I'm a social drinker" or a social smoker, but then we're all social. So does that mean that you're socially drinking or socially smoking when you go out, or is it only in certain situations? And which situations do you define? Where's the line?
Yeah.
So if I said to you, I've put you in the right crowd, in the right party, anyone would drink. But the problem is, at what point do you say this enough is enough? Is it when you start vomiting or when you pass out?
So
or
it turns into a binge.
Exactly
so
right.
This social
is kind of the loose word for, whatever the crowd's doing, and I may or may not shift my grey line depending on what the crowd's doing.
Okay. We got another question from an audience member. They're asking, hi, my friends at school always talk about sex and pornography, and now I have got into the habit of watching it. How can I stop this?
Okay, So there's a couple of programs that we know off the internet that basically ban you from allowing you to access these sites. So if you put in keywords like sex, pornography, and other features of sex onto the actual search engine, it'll just stop it. So that's one way. So you filter what you're seeing. The second way really is actually to have a discussion with someone a lot older about what sex is, okay? Because if you have, I guess for youth to have an understanding what sex is, it's almost like if you don't talk about it, then you understand it. But a lot of the youth don't. We have a lot of, in the hospital we used to work, we used to have a lot of 12 and 13-year-olds that were coming in pregnant, and it was the social norm. They come in with their babies, or with their baby bumps, and their books. And so you'd have 13-year-old girls that were pregnant, and the fathers were basically not old enough to be fathers. So the child was the custody of either the state, so of New South Wales, or the custody of the mother of the child. So basically, she would become a grandmother to her daughter who's 13. And we had it multiple times. I had one that was calling the boyfriend saying, my daughter's pregnant. And he's like, I didn't even know she could get pregnant. He had no idea. So I guess if you know that you got the problem, first person to speak to is, someone older than you, like a brother or sister. If you don't, get in contact with, an abuna that you find that you can talk to, but at the same time will be stern with you. That will say, look, it's okay and everyone does it. You want someone to basically say to you, look, that's wrong and these are the things that we can use or put into place to change it. Like sports and, for youth is always a good way of kind of as an outlet for frustrations and things, as opposed to going to websites and looking at pornography, because it's not a sustainable thing, because you get into marriage and you'll sustain that. There's actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, there's a movie called Fireproof. It's a Christian movie where the guy is actually addicted to pornography. And so his marriage is on the verge of breaking down. And this book actually became a worldwide phenomenon because he did, for 40 days, he did a trial of daily acts to renew his marriage. And basically it required him to destroy his computer, physically throw it out and destroy it. And at the same time, repent from his marriage completely.
Sure. Okay. There's one topic that's a bit controversial, but I'm going to ask it. I know the viewers are probably going to hate me. Shopping. Can shopping be addictive? Because people turn around and say retail therapy. It relieves me of stress. But is that a cover-up?
It is. And, Mina, it's funny. The people that don't realize that shopping is part of being an addiction is that the Americans now have basically direct-to-consumer advertising of everything. So not just clothing, I'm talking like medication. You can go, you get a surgeon that will advertise his skills and, the life-changing things he does direct to you. New Zealand has almost similar same thing. And Australia was going to adopt that at one stage, but then they thought, this is going to be a disaster. And you can imagine, if I send you constant emails about shoes that are on sale, even if you don't need them, eventually I'm putting in there a subliminal message, slowly, that will eventually lead you to buy something else. So if you notice a lot of the websites now, even on Facebook, they'll advertise something like spectacles, or they'll advertise, fruit or grocery or something else. There's always a subliminal message somewhere. Pornography sites do exactly the same thing. What they'll say is, if you're lonely, call this site or do this. And so shopping does exactly the same thing. So you'll get onto a website, you'll search for a newspaper or something like that, and the ads will come up. Mine has a sale on, or DJs or whatever else, and it becomes exactly the same. And once you start, that's it.
Sure. Okay. Well, we have time for one last question. Got a question in from an audience member asking, we love God in a way that we become addicted to Him. They're asking, are we able to love God in a way that we become addicted to Him?
It's a pretty tricky question, because I guess to be addicted to God, that means you allow Him to overpower your needs, and to be truly addicted to God is to be Christ-like. Now, Christ was not addicted to Himself. He basically became a pure heart, a pure soul for the people. He came to serve and not to be served. So if you can say that you're addicted to God, you're addicted to serving the children of God with no ultimate pleasure of your own. You're willing to self-sacrifice your pride, your honor, your glory, everything, to say, you know what, you take up the entire mansion, I'll take out the garage, I'll stay here, and whatever you want to do with my life, I'll surrender it all. So that's truly, truly an addicted life to God, because to be addicted to God means that you have no longer control of your life anymore, but God has it. So I wish we could all say that God, you're addicted to God, but to truly say that means it's similar to, the young rich man that came to Christ, and he said to him, he goes, how do I inherit the kingdom of heaven? And he said to him, go sell everything you have, and then you'll inherit it. And he went away upset. Each one of us is exactly the same. You all want to get closer to Christ. You all want to be addicted to Christ. You all want to be Christ-like. You just don't want to pay the price, because the price is big.
Yeah.
Like if I said to you, you'd have to give up your job, your livelihood, your suits, your cars, everything, and your technology to be with Christ.
Sure.
You'd think twice. So it is hard because it's self-sacrificial.
Okay. Well, that's the last question for today. So just to conclude, we got to admit that our addiction and pain. We got to accept the responsibility and danger that we have done. We got to ask for Christ's mercy and allow Him to enter our door. So there's nothing wrong with drinking coffee or playing games, but we must ask ourselves, if anything, has it become excessive? Has it become compulsive? Or has it become enslaving? So if it becomes enslaving, it's taking us away from Christ. It becomes a God to us. And there's only one God. And just like the commandments, the first commandment tells us, you shall have no other God but me. So our addictions are gods to us. So they have no empathy for us. They don't love us, or they don't care about ruining our lives. So I'd like to thank you, Dr. David, for coming, and it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning into today's episode. Next week's episode is about Illuminati. Does it exist? What is it about? So please take the number down and prepare questions, because this is going to be a controversial topic. So the number is 045592. I'm Mina Ibrahim from your CYC studios in Sydney. God bless.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Daniel is a faithful man. His focus on God.